Okay, hi everybody, can you hear me? Great. I'm Kristen Body. I'm the Membership and Events Manager here at the Asheville Art Museum. Thanks for being here for today's member program. 1 week ago, the museum's newest exhibition, Question Bridge, Black Males, opened to the public, and we're thrilled to have the artist Chris Johnson here with us today. In just a little bit, you'll hear from Chris as he discusses the origin of the project, and Associate Curator Whitney Richardson will lead a Q&A with him. We do have some questions prepared for Chris, but I encourage you all to submit your questions as well. And before I turn this over to them, I just want to go over some housekeeping for all our attendees. You should note that your microphones are muted by default. We are recording today's program, so if you prefer not to be recorded, just make sure that your video remains off. Both the microphone and video camera symbols at the bottom left of your screen will have red lines through them to indicate when they're off. And if you would like to make a question, or I'm sorry, ask a question or make a comment, please do so by typing it into the chat box, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. And feel free to enter your questions as we go. Whitney will read them when we get to the Q&A portion. And after this program is over, please do take a moment to fill out the evaluation that I'll send over to all the attendees this afternoon. The information you provide is important for us as we work to improve our Zoom programs, and it also provides us with helpful information when we apply for grants or report on these programs. So please do keep that in mind. And finally, this has been a challenging year for the museum, and we have 2 really important ways that folks can support us this fall season. First, you can visit our website to learn more about our biggest fundraiser of the year, our virtual gala, which will be held on November 14th, as well as some socially distanced in-person events we'll have leading up to it. I hope you'll join us in celebrating all the museum has to offer and our 1-year anniversary of the new museum's opening. And second, you can visit our support page to learn more about our COVID Relief Fund and Matching Challenge. Through the end of the year, all annual fund donations and membership upgrades will be matched dollar for dollar by a long-time foundation supporter. And I want to thank everyone who has contributed to the museum already. All our members are such wonderful supporters, and I hope we can count on you to help keep the arts vibrant in our community. And now I'll turn this over to Whitney Richardson. So thank you all for being here.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Hi, everyone. My name is Whitney Richardson. I'm Associate Curator here at the Asheville Art Museum. And of course, I have to cough right away. The Asheville Art Museum is really pleased and proud to bring you the exhibition Question Bridge, Black Males. And I'm so happy today to introduce you to our speaker, Chris Johnson, one of the artists of this artwork. Question Bridge, Black Males is a single channel, as we're showing it, artwork by Chris Johnson, Hank Willis Thomas, Beate Ross Smith, and Kamal Sinclair. They collected questions and answers from over 150 Black men in New York, Chicago, Oakland, San Francisco, Birmingham, Atlanta, New Orleans, and Philadelphia over a 4-year period, and that was from 2008 to 2012. And compiled it into this video that we're now showing in our museum that catalogs around 1,500 exchanges. It runs about 3 hours total, but its premise can be understood with any amount of time that you're able to come into the museum and devote to it. And Kristen, if you'll share a slide, I wanted everyone to kind of get a glimpse at how our exhibition looks. Let's see. Yeah, there you go. Just so everyone knows, we are practicing social distancing here still, so the benches are spaced out. There is room in the back of the auditorium there where I'm standing to take the photo, so that you do feel, we hope, safe and able to stay for a while and enjoy the video. As Kristen mentioned, it's now open and it will be until March 15th of next year. Chris Johnson, that we have here with us today, was the original artist of this work in 1996. First done with 10 men, that video installation was created for the Museum of Photographic Arts and the Malcolm X Library in San Diego, California. Some of Chris's background: he studied photography with Ansel Adams, Imogen Cunningham, and Wynne Bullock. He's the former director of the Mother Jones International Fund for Documentary Photography and chair of the City of Oakland's Cultural Affairs Commission. Currently, he's a full professor and chair of the photography program at the California College of the Arts in Oakland, California. He is the media wall manager and public art management team member for the Oakland Museum and the Port of Oakland. Please join me in welcoming virtually anyway, Chris Johnson today.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. Of course, it's really an honor and a pleasure to have my work there in North Carolina. Just one correction in the introduction. The original project had 10 men and an equal number of women, which is an important detail.
That is.
Yeah, the title of it in 1996 was Question Bridge Black Community. And the context for that will be clear when I run through the history of it.
Wonderful.
But once again, you know, I just have to say that this project, as you mentioned, this particular version of the project began in 2007, 2008. And the fact that it's still relevant is both, you know, a humbling kind of honor, but also, as I'm sure you'll understand, kind of a tragedy, you know, that we're still so deeply enmeshed in issues of Black justice, and the issue of how we perceive Black males is still so relevant, you know. So our hope is, you know, that what we're doing is making a contribution to an issue that's troubling all of us at this point. And I'm really looking forward to your questions. Those of you who had a chance to see it, I mean, I would love to know what your thoughts are. So with that, I guess I could share my screen and jump into beginning.
Go ahead and share your screen.
Okay.
And we'll let you give your presentation, and then I will pop back on at the end to sort of start the conversation, ask some questions, and I'll keep an eye on the chat box if any of our audience members have questions.
Great. So is that working, or are you seeing both screens?
Yeah, we're seeing the presenter notes at the bottom, Chris.
Okay. So let me switch modes here. Sorry about that. So now you should be having the pure keynote experience. Okay.
That looks good.
Good. What I'd like to do is begin with just a short trailer to give you a sense of the sort of content and concept. You'll get a chance to see and understand something about the methodology. The thing to remember as you watch this is that these men are asking questions that are very much their own. They're prompted by us asking them, do you have a question for another Black man who's very different from yourself? And none of the men were in each other's presence. They never met each other. This is just their spontaneous offering of questions and answers. So with that, I'll do a quick intro.
Black man,
do you want to get out of the situation that you're in?
what is the reluctance to taking responsibility for improving our communities?
Are your children better or worse off as a result of your involvement?
Why wouldn't you be happy with your son being gay?
Why are you so violent?
Why do you have that take mentality?
Why are you afraid of being intelligent? Why?
Why?
What I want to know is why.
I believe that we've incorporated a lot of things that are unhealthy to us.
We are supposed to be tough.
I can't let them see no type of sucker.
Along with various other stereotypes.
The level of mentorship in our community is not as strong as it possibly could be.
When I came up, crack was a quick way for a Black man to make $1 million.
Sometimes I think because we think we're Black, we're some other kind of human beings, but we're just like most other human beings.
Why didn't y'all leave us the blueprint? We did leave you a blueprint.
We just didn't tell you where it was.
That's something that we dropped the ball on.
What do you fear? That something will harm my children.
I fear success.
Am I the only one who has problem eating chicken, watermelon, and bananas in front of white people?
God, hold on, bro. Y'all niggas crazy.
That word, we have to stop using it.
I think black people can say nigga anytime they want.
How dare you? What right do you have to use this word?
A lot of nigga questions for the rapper.
What is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
This is the easiest question in the world to answer.
The thing that we have in common is that we are male and we are black.
All right, my question is, I try to live good, but I'm surrounded by bad. And I want to know what it is I could do to do better and live peaceful, surrounded by all evil. How can I do that?
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Are you still seeing my screen? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but your screen, you're not sharing anymore.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. So that gave you a sense of the project. And, you know, one of the things that we wanted the trailer to indicate to people who saw it is that the project is about the widest possible range of Black male voices that we could get. And as I mentioned, it's a demonstration of the way the methodology worked. These men are simply looking into the camera and asking and answering questions. But I wanted to give you some background because, you know, as much as this project is of interest to sociologists and political thinkers, we really are artists. And so to really make it clear how this project came into being, I want to begin by talking about my own background as an artist. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and this is a slide that shows me the way I looked when I arrived in California as a 17-year-old, really kind of dazed. Picture was done in Yosemite, where I met my teachers, Ansel Adams and Imogen Cunningham and Wynn Bullock, artists who were profoundly influential in my life. The fact that they sort of embraced me as a young voice was so amazing to me. And, you know, like a lot of artists in the beginning, I began by trying to echo the work of people who inspired me. This is my attempt to try to emulate the work of Wynn Bullock. But then Imogen Cunningham inspired me to begin working on portraiture. So this is an early portrait, another early portrait. This is a study that I did of my mother that began as 3 individual pictures and ended up being a triptych that I added words to sort of give a fuller sense of what it meant to me. So this reads, summer 1974. After years of silence and painful distance between us, I wanted her to see the important places of my life. When Yosemite came into view, she cried. She reluctantly agreed when I asked her to pose in front of a dead tree. My mother, obviously. Summer 1980. When her hair grew back after chemotherapy, we were surprised at how soft it felt. After we danced at my sister's wedding, I had to carry her down the stairs from the reception. We had never seen fear in her eyes before. And finally, a month before she died, she looked at me. We knew we were seeing each other for the last time. So I show this to you to give you a sense of how personal my work was. But more recently, this is a project that I did in 2018. It takes the works of Dorothea Lange that I discovered in the Library of Congress and combines them with that wonderful quote by Theodore Parker, the abolitionist. It was an attempt to try to give the audience hope. It was part of a billboard and bus shelter project that I did here in the Bay Area. So it gives you a sense of the range of my work in a way. But then we need to talk about Question Bridge. And, I mentioned that it's, most importantly, a work of art. And every work of art begins with some kind of formative experience. I mean, there's something that the artist experienced that he or she wants to convey through their medium. And I use this picture by the great documentary photographer Roy DeCarava to give you a sense of my background. And this is a photograph he did of, I'm sure, a little girl. But there are a lot of symbols in this that really give me a sense of not only where I grew up and the way the community looks, but there's something aspirational about that flight of stairs. So that's the way the world felt to me when I was a little child growing up in Brooklyn. And this is the Brooklyn that I recall. This is another photograph by Roy DeCarava. So you can see a mother walking her children to school. That's something that families could do in working class neighborhoods. There was a lot of poverty, of course, but because this is before the civil rights movement, the fair housing laws hadn't been passed. And so Blacks of all classes lived together, and the people who were most influential, were doctors and lawyers. But then soon as the civil rights laws passed, one of the unintended consequences was that African Americans could all of a sudden live where they wanted to live, and those who wanted to leave did leave, and those who chose to stay or had to stay did stay. So this photograph by Bruce Davidson is more the way we think of Black neighborhoods now, where poverty and frustration produces crime and violence in children. So I saw that split happen during my childhood, where the Black community was a kind of compressed whole and then divided into those who did and did not live in the hood. So keep in mind that that was a formative experience that stayed in my mind. So many, many years later, when I was a professor of photography at the California College of the Arts, I met this woman, Suzanne Lacey, who's a very well-known performance artist, activist, writer, theorist, educator. And she and I collaborated on a project that came to be known as The Roof is on Fire. And just very quickly, it was based on the idea that if we could create a safe space for young kids of color to express themselves, the white audience, primarily white audience, would get to hear something about their lives. And so we put them in cars on a rooftop in downtown Oakland. And so you're seeing all these cars that are positioned and they have children in them. And what you can't see here is that they have badges around their necks that say, "Shut up and listen." And so it's kind of a theatrical protection device that allowed these young people to just talk and talk and talk. And the audience got a chance to listen. And the kids talked about issues that were important to their lives, about racial profiling rather, and sex and violence and all kinds of things that that they would talk amongst themselves, but they knew they were being listened to. So it was a profound experience for them and for the audience. And so I instantly went from being known as a professor and a fine art, very earnest, very private fine art photographer, to a performance artist. It was a big shift in my career, which is why a number of years later, I was asked by the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego to create something to coincide with the Republican convention that was happening in San Diego in 1996. And it had to be in video. So I thought back to that initial experience that I had as a child and realized that there was this vast rift between different sectors of the Black community. And I thought to myself, well, what could I do as an artist to try to connect these two parts of the Black community that don't have an easy way to communicate with each other. And thinking back to the experience of The Roof is on Fire, where listening was sort of the active creative force, I thought that listening is primarily a very passive way to be generous. When you're listening to someone, you're suspending your own voice for a moment so that you can hear what the other person is saying, but it's passive. And I thought, well, what would be an evolution beyond that? Like, what would be a way that could be defined as an active form of being generous? And I realized that asking a sincere and honest question, if you feel safe enough, is a way to express not only your uncertainty, but you're setting yourself up to listen. So I thought, well, if I'm trying to get these two parts of the Black community to communicate with each other, maybe if I encourage them in the form of a video question that they could maybe answer each other, and I would create this question bridge between those who live in the hood and those who don't. So that's how the concept of question bridge was born. And so this is a slide, and I'll show you a small clip from the original question bridge. So I knew nothing about video at that point in my life, and lighting was new to me. So, you'll see a lot of sort of crude audio visual dynamics, but I think the spirit of that experimental process will come across.
Have you given any thought to where the money comes from for people who are receiving public assistance? And do you care?
I thought about where public assistance money comes from, and I do care. But for one, I am on public assistance, and it's not because we don't want to work. It's not because we want to sit at home and get a check or anything like that. A lot of people perceive us young teenage mothers to sit at home and just collect a check, where a lot of times we do go out and look for work. We do work. We can't work as long because childcare is really up there. At this point in time, I pay $300 a month for one child, and I have two, and I pay $150 a month for another child. The $300 is because my child is under 2. The $150 is because my child is over 2 and is school age. So yes, I know where the money comes from taxpayers, but we do have people who take up American jobs who are not taxpayers because they're not an American citizen. How about that? We get decreases in our checks because we're American citizens, but yet if you're a refugee or you're an immigrant or you're able working alien, legal working alien in the United States, you get an increase in your check when you come over here from different countries, because the United States government have so-called some kind of agreement with them. They come over here and they're able to get grants to start businesses where we are already living here, working, doing the backbone of the country, and we don't get that same type of respect. But yet people look down upon us because we are on public assistance. They like to say, oh, the Black teenage moms are going out, opening their legs and having babies just to get on welfare to get out the house. That is not always the case. It's a small proportion that does that, but you only focus on this small proportion.
It's really fair to think of any work of art as an elaborate way to tell the truth. So this was an experiment that you can imagine me behind the camera listening to both William Gaines ask that very tough question, and then being able, in the context of the project, to take that question to Kiona and standing there and realizing this experiment is working. I mean, she's empowered to express herself profoundly about an issue that obviously she's been giving a lot of thought to. So, that's the way the original question bridge concept began and how it looked. And I was really excited by it. I was able to very quickly get an hour's worth for the installation. And I thought, well, maybe there's something I can do with this project. So I began with my own limited means to try to promote it. I sent copies of that original project to friends and to CNN and various places, and it didn't stick. So I went on with my life and did lots of things, and that was a project in my past. And what happened was a friend of mine named Deborah Willis, who you'll see more of later, had a son named Hank Willis Thomas, and he saw that project. He came to my school as a graduate student and saw that original project. And years later, after he graduated with 2 MFA degrees from my school and became a renowned artist, he and his mom were going through their VHS collection and found that original tape. And he was actually in line for a grant at that point and called me up, I believe it was 2007, and said, let's redo that original project. But this time, let's use Black males, because one of the things that's a driving concept of Question Bridge projects is that I always do them within demographics, not between them. So we needed a target demographic, and I needed to be persuaded that Black males were an appropriate project focus, because women had been such a strong part of the first project that I really sort of was reluctant to not include them, but it turned out to be a stroke of brilliant collaboration because he persuaded me to focus on Black males. And so this is Hank, the way he looked then, still looks pretty much this way. He's a dad now. His work is motivated primarily, initially, by the murder of his beloved cousin Sangha. So he's done profound work based on expressions of irony and frustration over violence in the Black community. Just to give a sense of his background. This is some of Hank's work. So again, he was a graduate student that I worked with. Another graduate student was Baite Ross Smith, who deals with code switching in his work, the way the same Black man is perceived differently depending on how they happen to be dressed. One of the other collaborators who became a really important force was a Black woman named Kamal Sinclair. In addition to being a choreographer and artist, she had an MBA, so she brought a kind of business consciousness. And so that's how Question Bridge Black males came to be. And as Whitney mentioned, it took us 4 years to use the same methodology with much more sophisticated equipment, and I knew much more about lighting and video. So this is the same methodology applied to Black males. So this is a man in Birmingham, Alabama, who asks this question, again, unprompted. Just, do you have a question for another Black man who's very different from yourself?
I wonder, Black man, are you really ready for freedom? And if not, what will it take for you to want and need this freedom?
So as you can imagine, after you gather questions as poignant and sharp as that, you have a responsibility to try to get relevant answers. So I spent about 1.5 years working with in-prison programs to allow the prison authorities here in the Bay Area to allow me to bring cameras and audio and lighting equipment into the prison. And I played this question for inmates, and here's an answer that we got.
Am I ready for freedom? And what would it take for me to want that freedom? First, I would have to stop and ask myself, and that's a tough question. Because freedom to me is a mind state, because you got some people that's not in jail, that's not free. You got people that's in prison in dysfunctional relationships. You got people that's in prison with jobs, they work 9 to 5 that they don't like. Some people are in prison with alcohol and drug abuse. So I would have to really ask myself what's in prison in me. And what's been in prison in me is my self-esteem, my lack of self-esteem. My lack of self-esteem has led me to commit crime, to hurt people, to manipulate people, right? Because if I love myself, there's no way I could walk outside this room and punch somebody if I'm esteemed within myself. So to be free to me I would have to change, So in order for me to grow, I have to change, because if change is necessary for growth, in order for me to grow, I would have to adapt the mentality that something has got to change in me. I have to change my mind state. I'd have to change the way I talk. I have to change the people I interact with. That would be free.
So again, it's really not surprising, right, that a Black man in prison would have relevant things to say on a personal level about the meaning of freedom, right? So this methodology, which is so deceptively simple, is bound to give people a chance to tell deep and important truths if they are motivated by relevant questions. And all of us have deep questions to share. So this is the way the project looked on the road. So you see Bayate doing the audio and me behind the camera. Another really important part of the team was Hank. He's on his laptop looking for questions to direct to sitters. Sometimes, I had no idea what question he was going to choose. So this is the way the project looked for 4 years, traveling around the country, getting as many relevant questions and answers as we could. And then we went into a think tank process in 2010. The Bay Area Video Coalition Producers Institute gave us a chance to really think about what we were doing and brainstorm with people. And that's when we realized that we had something important, that it was more than just an installation piece, that it was actually a transmedia piece that really needed to be seen and heard in different platforms. And we were honored to have it open in 2012 in 2 museums in different parts of the country at the same time, the Brooklyn Museum and the Oakland Museum. The Sundance Film Festival accepted it into the festival, so I got to go to the festival. We got to go to the festival with badges, as directors. So to have this big a splash in 2012 was really kind of amazing. And you have to think of the culmination of the installation when it was accepted into the permanent collections of both the Oakland Museum and the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. It was a very heady experience to walk into this extraordinary building and see my name on the wall. It's also permanently installed at the Gant Center in Charlotte and the Oakland Museum. So there are many places where it's permanently installed, and so I'm really honored to be there in Asheville. It was always also published as a book by Aperture, another great honor. And as I mentioned, Question Bridge is more than an installation. It's more than something that belongs in museums. So we created a very elaborate website where you can see all of the content. All of the men who contributed can search for their names and see the questions and answers that the project delivered to them. Plus, there has been a mobile app that allows Black men to upload questions. So there's an ongoing dialogue. There are community events. I created something called the Blueprint Roundtables, which I'll talk about in a moment, but another really important component is teachers saw this and realized how powerful it would be to bring the voices of Black males into their classrooms. So there's a curriculum that we created, which I'll tell you more about. This is the way the installation looked at the Brooklyn Museum. This is the way it looked at the Sundance Film Festival. So there was a question that you saw in the trailer. Why didn't you leave us a blueprint? And the idea was that question was directed from the hip hop generation to the civil rights generation. Like, why didn't the elders leave guidance for how young men in the Black community should grow? So I thought of bringing that question to a public event that allowed elders from communities around the country to talk to youths. The structure was basically the same. Only Black males were allowed to ask and answer questions, and it was a really fascinating thing. We've had maybe 7 or 8 of these in different parts of the country. They're very popular and invariably raise issues that are present in Black communities wherever they are. I mentioned there's a website, questionbridge.com, that you can visit. Recently, this was, so you have to imagine that these monitors are 19 feet from one end to the other. This was a night event that happened in one of the places where we did a lot of filming. So this was like bringing Question Bridge back to a community in San Francisco that helped create it. So this is the way the website looks. And if you click the Explore button, you see questions that were uploaded from Black men. And a lot of the questions, you know, personal, very personal, like how do you mend a broken heart? And the way it's structured is you can see the people who answered that question below, and you get a chance to hear them give answers. So I certainly invite you to visit the website and find the way Dennis Bassett answered that question. I mean, one of the things that's important is the universality of the questions that these Black men ask. I mean, one of the things that's a deep aspiration of the project is that you would go into it with one notion of who Black men are and come away realizing that we're just human beings, you know. So the Question Bridge curriculum I mentioned was something that was inspired by teachers who really felt as if it was crucial to try to get this in some form in front of school teachers and children. So Kamal and this group of extraordinary women created the curriculum. I more recently updated it with the help of James Ford and North Carolina so that the projects, this is just an example of the way some of the projects were created through the curriculum. And the Gantt Center in Charlotte teamed up with me, and we created something called the Gantt Teacher Institute, where I did presentations. The chancellor of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system collaborated with us to put together a project for teachers in Charlotte. So it's actually being used in schools. And you can think of this as being, in many ways, the ongoing life of it. Teachers are just so inspired to have Black men help them speak to their children about issues that are really relevant to their communities. And so I use this as a slide just to say that, you know, this project is called Question Bridge Black Males, but it really is designed to use Black males as a lens to look at the issues that really belong to all of us. So that's it.
That's great, Chris. Thank you. We have had some questions coming in. I wanted to start with one that I had for you. I encourage everyone to go and look at the website. It is really interactive, and you can see the multiple answers that are given to each question, as well as where in the country the question was asked. It's a very interactive and fun website to go to. And one thing I noticed on there is you have quite a few quotations by W.E.B. Du Bois. And I wondered if you would tell us more about your interest in him and why you chose those quotations.
Yeah, well, anybody who's interested in getting insight into the Black experience, looking for the most eloquent and informed voices, finds their way to the voice of W.E.B. Du Bois. So he wrote something called The Souls of Black Folks that, that offered a couple of really powerful conceptual images, the veil that a young Black person realizes stands between them and the white world just because of the color of their skin. I mean, the experience of realizing, oh, I'm different. And that difference makes it hard for communication to happen between me and, you know, the white world around us. That notion of the veil, the idea of double consciousness, that you do have your own personal consciousness, and you also have to be mindful of the way the white world sees you. So you're actually using two consciousnesses to locate your own identity. So anyway, like those concepts and the whole scholarship that he brought to the issue of Black liberation was something that was so inspiring. So if you're looking for wall quotes, you go to W.B. Du Bois, because you hope that the audience will follow that trail to the amazing contribution he added to our cultural history.
Right. Oh, Chris, can I ask you to turn your light back on?
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. We turned it off for the presentation, and
there you are.
There, now we got you back on camera.
Hi.
I wonder if there are any other writers or civil rights activists,
Oh gosh,
sociologists. Yeah, you don't have to name everyone, right? But just
well,
curious
yeah.
to hear your background in this, and what who you thought were asking and answering the right questions that inspired this.
Sure. Well, maybe a quick history here. You know, there's always been a strong debate between competing visions of Black liberation. And it, you know, maybe goes back to Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, who at that time in our history, around the Civil War and Reconstruction, were debating different pathways of Black movement away from oppression toward liberation. And then, you know, we're all familiar with the Malcolm X and Martin Luther King division. I grew up very much aware that those two strong voices represented different paths. I was very much inspired by the Civil Rights Movement and Martin Luther King, but Malcolm X represented a very strong point of view. So, you know, that same dynamic, you probably are aware, is happening now. So you could look at people like John McWhorter and Coleman Hughes, who have views about, you know, what is the most relevant way to define Black consciousness and Black freedom. On the other side, you know, you have people like Ibram Kendi, you know, and Robin DiAngelo, Ta-Nehisi Coates. You know, they have really strong things to say in opposition to those. I mean, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, you know, is an inspiring source of ideas and concepts that provide pathways. So, I mean, it's a tremendously fertile time, and I think depending on your intuitions, you know, you're drawn to one side of the debate or the other, because there really is a dialectic going on. I just want to point something out, though, that, you know, all along there's always been another perspective, and that is the perspective of Black artists. You know, Paul Robeson, for example, you know, was a very powerful voice. He was a singer, you know, and an activist and a scholar. So, you know, what an artist does is speak from the perspective of you know, an empowered individual, you know, whose views don't neatly fall into one category or another. I mean, I see myself really in that camp, but, you know, you can't be oblivious to the John McWhorters and the Coleman Hugheses and the Ta-Nehisi Coateses of our time.
Right. Well, that leads me into a question from the audience asking, you don't actually appear in Question Bridge at all, do you?
No.
No. And they were wondering, why is that? Why not present your own personal view?
Well, I think after seeing the background of the project, you'd have to say that my personal view of the issue is woven through every part of it. I mean, I was there behind the camera. I was making, you know, together with Hank and Baite and Kamal, although, you know, one of the dynamics, just to be clear, I mean, Kamal being female couldn't be anywhere near the men while they were asking and answering questions. I mean, she changed the dynamic. I mean, you know, as you know, women speak differently when they're by themselves as opposed to when men are around. The same thing works for men. And so Kamal was never in the room or anywhere around when, but the idea of, you know, how to get the most authentic and spontaneous and believable voices into the project meant that we stayed in the background. So that's the way we structured it, and that's why, you know, there were questions that we could have given answers to from a personal perspective, but we wanted the men to speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm. A couple questions here. Someone wanted to know, how did you come across these speakers and ask them to participate? And then how did participating in this project affect the men that were involved?
Yeah, well, I can give a really good answer to the first question, and I outlined that when I talked about how I worked my way into prison to get those answers from men, because there were questions directed specifically at incarcerated men. So the questions that we gathered predicted exactly how we needed to move in order to get answers. The way we got the questions, it was interesting. The very first man who spoke in the project, we were on our way to Birmingham, Alabama, to start the project, and I was sitting next to a man on the plane, but we had nobody in Alabama to talk to. So I thought, well, here's a black man. So I took a deep breath and I said, gee, why are you going to Birmingham? And luckily he said, oh, well, I'm helping sell merchandise at a Alicia Keys concert. And that's why I'm going. So then I thought, is he going to ask me why I'm going? So he finally said, why are you going? And I said, well, I'm glad you asked. I'm working on this project where we gather questions and answers. And for example, do you have a question that you'd love to ask a black man who's very different from you? And he said, yeah, man. I said, well, listen, why don't you come to our hotel room and bring some friends? And he brought 6 men. And so, our experience after 4 years of traveling around the country is that every black man that we encountered and asked, no matter where, sometimes we gathered people off the street. I saw a Green Beret in Chicago, and I said, stop the car, let me go ask this guy, because I think he'd be good. And they all understood, and they all said yes, except for one man in New Orleans who was too shy. He said, I'm camera shy, I'm sorry, I can't do it, but I'd love to. So the fact that black men, wherever we encountered them, intuitively understood what it is we were trying to do and why it was important for them to express their questions and answers says something about the serendipitous and special qualities of the project.
Right. And I think in a way it does express your point of view then, the fact that you believe these questions need to be asked and answered openly and honestly. In promoting that dialogue, I think does show a lot of your personality.
Well, I hope so. That's why I gave some background about the kind of work that I do, as a photographer, really does correlate, I think, and I hope you see how one generates the other. I mean, this really does feel like it's my work together as part of the team. Yeah. Right.
We had a question from the audience too on audience. And have you observed audiences watching the piece? Do you notice a difference between Black audience members and white audience members?
That's a very good question. Well, of course, there's an irresistible temptation to sort of lurk anonymously in the background, during a 3-hour installation and watch how people react. And it's so gratifying to see that some people get hooked and really can't stop watching it. So yeah, I mean, that's always a gratifying thing. But I think conceptually it's important to realize that in creating Question Bridge the way that I did, I have 3 audiences in mind, okay? So the first audience for the content of the project are the men themselves, right? So that's why the website is so important. A person who asks very generously a very personal question is an audience for the answer to that question. So the project really has to be responsible for providing that person an answer to their question. So that's like the inner circle of 3 concentric circles of audience. The second level out are any Black man who identifies as a Black man is an audience for the project, right? So hopefully, if the project is comprehensive enough, if it's authentic enough, then it will speak to Black men. They will identify with the questions and answers. And so they are the second tier of audience for the project. And, hopefully it resonates with them. But there's a third and wider and maybe infinite audience. And that is, if you happen not to be a Black male, then the project invites you to be a kind of privileged witness to what feels like an inner conversation between Black men who don't know that you're there. So I guess I hope that you, as non-Black males, feel as if it offers you insights into Black male consciousness in a way that can't happen any other way, right? So there are these three overlapping ways that Question Bridge tries to speak to audiences and shift prevailing conceptions about Black maleness.
Right. Even as you were saying, that Kamal would have to not be in the room. As a Black woman, it's really down to the Black men in the room having this conversation honestly, and then we're privileged to get to kind of peer in on that conversation and learn from it.
That's right. Now, and of course, it's a faux conversation. I mean, the editor creates the conversational dynamic after the fact. I mean, none of those men ever knew each other, never saw each other, never, were in each other's rooms, in each other's presences. But yeah, they were there.
And that kind of leads to another question here about the editing process. I think there were some answers that are not in our final installation, although I believe they're on the website.
Sure. Oh yeah. So, so the project generated so many questions and answers that when I sat down and eliminated redundancy and put them into a sequence of questions and answers that seemed relevant, I had a timeline that entailed 15 hours. So with no duplication. And I thought, well,
wow,
have we created a 15-hour project, But wisely, we gave that 15-hour timeline, I called it the master list, but because it was really just a list, to an experienced editor. Her name is Rosa White. She's a professional editor, a friend of Hank's. And Rosa is the one who created the final 3-hour version from the 15 hours that I gathered. So yeah, there was a lot of precious, we thought, material that didn't make it into the final cut, but we have no regrets. And I just have to say Rosa was a genius. For example, you may notice that, some men are looking to the right or to the left. Well, the reason they're doing that is because, I was aware when I was filming that every gesture of theirs was important, So the fact that they were looking at the monitor, listening to the question, was there as raw footage. And so Rosa realized that and used that to create the illusion that the men in real time are listening to each other. So, kudos to Rosa for that. When I sat down with my wife and watched it the first time, I was just in awe.
Right. So there's no 15-hour director's cut version out there for us to view?
You wouldn't want to see it.
No,
go to the website.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. I had a really interesting question come in with the typography that you use for Question Bridge Black males. If there was some meaning to the broken letters in it.
Yeah. Well, the beauty of a collaboration is that one of the team members, one of the friends of the team members is a great graphic designer. And yeah, we hope that what that implies is that, the full picture of who Black men are is still to be seen. So that's what I love about what that graphic sort of implies.
Right. And still developing, sort of coming to its fullness.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. Someone was asking a question that sort of leads to one of my questions I had. As a viewer myself of Question Bridge, I'm struck by just how relevant those questions and answers still are today. How has the social justice climate changed? Do you feel like your artwork helps in these changes? And would you ask different questions, or I guess you didn't ask them, encourage different questions from the viewer, from interviewees today if you were doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the questions that are directed to topical social and political issues would clearly be different. And when we first began this, Barack Obama wasn't president yet. You know, he became president, and then so there are lots of things that that belong to that time that are different from this time. I think that some of the most relevant questions are universal, like the young man who asked, how do I become a good person when I'm surrounded by evil temptations? I mean, that's a question that belongs to all of us in all times. So that universal, quality, I think, makes the project timeless in a certain way. But I also think that, there are really modest questions. Like when we did a project, a public project, one young Black man asked, how do I learn to tie a bow tie if I don't have a father around? So, I mean, even some of those very innocent questions really are relevant and resonate with people on a personal level. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, the project certainly belongs to that time, and the fact that it's still so relevant for us to try to see through the opaque demographic that Black men still are is a challenge.
Yeah, be nice to have it displayed as a historic relic of how things had been.
Yeah, it's in the being in the Smithsonian in their collection helps with that. That's what's so humbling about being in their collection.
Wonderful. Well, we're nearing the end of our time for today. If there are any other questions, pop them in the chat box. Maybe we can get to one more. But I really want to thank you so much for today, Chris, for talking to us, and you and your fellow artists for making this project that we're able to show in the Asheville Art Museum.
Oh, I see a question about Black women.
Oh yeah, the sequel.
Well, now that you understand the dynamic of how question bridges work, you know that Black women would have to do that, right?
Absolutely.
I couldn't do it. And there are lots of derivatives of the Question Bridge project that are out there in the world, and I'm very, very sort of inspired when I encounter them.
Yeah. Someone was asking if they can watch this, so we thank you all today for watching live, but then it will become available on our website to watch again later. Right, thank you all for today. Go to the Asheville Art Museum website to buy your time tickets to come in and see this. We're showing it in our multi-purpose space on the first floor, and we will have it up until March 15th. Chris, when you can travel again, please come visit us in Asheville.
I will.
All right.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, Chris. This was wonderful, and I wish I didn't have work to do so I could go and just sit in front of the video for the next 3 hours, but I'll break it up over time so I don't get in trouble with my boss.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you everyone for attending, and we will post this on the website by tomorrow so you can watch it again, and please do come to the museum so you can see the video in full in person. Thanks everyone.